Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Is the universe, at least this one, made mostly of plasma? Can plasma have conscious awareness? Are life forms based on plasma responsible for what we think of as paranormal beings?
Hello, and welcome to the 999th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, coming to you via YouTube, TalkStream Live on YouTube, and via TuneIn.com. I always forget that one for some reason. I'm Ben, and that was Paul, and today we bring you a new guest with mind-wrenching scientific ideas. And to join us, you can call us from anywhere. That's 401-766-1240, or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com.
Coming to us from the UK today via Zoom is Professor Robert Temple, a PhD academic who certainly isn't afraid of new ideas. Dr. Temple is the author of a dozen controversial books, including The Sirius Mystery, the Sirius as in the star, New Scientific Evidence of Alien Contact 5,000 Years Ago, and A New Science of Heaven, of the new science of plasma physics is shedding light on spiritual experience, the center of our discussion today. His books have been translated into a total of 44 foreign languages. Dr. Temple is visiting professor of history and philosophy of science at Tsinghua University in Beijing, and previously held an equivalent position at the University of Louisville, Kentucky. For many years, he was a science writer for the Sunday Times, The Guardian, and a science reporter for Time Life, as well as a frequent reviewer for Nature and profile writer for The New Scientist. He is a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society, has been a member of the Egypt Exploration Society since the 1970s, as well as a member of numerous other academic groups. Sometimes working with his wife Olivia, he also has many media credentials. If you wonder why he doesn't have much of an English accent, it's because he's a native of Kentucky. His website, robert-temple.com.
So, Dr. Robert Temple, welcome to Behind the Paranormal.
Well, howdy. I thought I'd better speak like a Kentuckian, or would you rather I spoke more English-like?
Very good, yeah.
I'm very pleased to be on air with you like this, because I know you're deep thinkers and you have really great shows, and so it's an honor for me to be here with the Enos.
Well, thank you very much. I am going to start recording this because we're doing kind of a seat of the pants.
No, it's being recorded.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Well, I'm just being sure.
All right.
Okay. So thank you, Dr. Temple. Ben, why don't I take the first question?
Hold on, I may have just figured this out.
Good. Well, I'll ask the question anyway. So what is plasma, and is it really the basis of the physical universe and possibly the paranormal?
Well, it might be a mistake to call the universe the physical universe, because it isn't. The universe is made of 99% plasma. In fact, 99.9%. In fact, some people say 99.99%. That's a lot of plasma.
It is.
It's not what you'd call physical, because when we speak of physical matter, we speak of the kind of matter that our bodies and planet are made of, which consist of atoms. But plasma does not consist of atoms. So this is a revolution in our thought, and that's why my book is called A New Science of Heaven, because we really need a new science. Our physics is a physics of atomic matter, which we call physical, and what we really need is a physics of plasma. So I expect the next thing you're going to do is ask me what plasma is.
Well, yes.
Yes.
But fancy me knowing that. Well, plasma consists of particles, as indeed do atoms. Now, plasma is consisting of electrons which have a negative charge, and when they flow, that's called electricity. Then it contains protons which have a positive charge, And in addition to that, it consists of ions, that's IONS, which are often regarded as incomplete atoms. But I look at it the other way. I look upon atoms as value-added ions.
Okay. When I first encountered your book, I thought of Sir Fred Hoyle, who is the author of the panspermia theory that dust clouds, which you speculate about, are responsible for spreading life throughout the universe. And lo and behold, in Chapter 2, it seems that your Sri Lankan co-author was mentored by Sir Fred Hoyle. How are your theories like his?
Well, Fred was a wonderful man, and his chief student and disciple was, and still is, my friend, Professor Chandra Vikramasinghe. That's a long, complicated Sri Lankan name. And he indeed carries on the ideas which he and Fred evolved together about panspermia, which means that life is spread throughout the universe. And indeed, as far as the Earth is concerned, it comes down through the atmosphere, having been deposited as dust and microbiota, as small life forms are called, in the higher atmosphere by the passing tails of comets. Because comets are looked upon as harboring life forms inside them, and they volatilize as they come near the sun, and bits stream off behind them and form the tails. Because when they are far out in space, they don't have tails. The tail is caused by getting near to the sun. And so panspermia is an idea that Fred and Chandra originated, although there were preliminary notions about that in antiquity, and I'm the one who wrote the paper called The Prehistory of Panspermia, which you can download from my entry on researchgate.net, where my technical papers are to be found, including one that I've published in which suggests that there was never a Big Bang to the universe. And the idea that the universe was created from a central explosion was called, as using a term of abuse by Fred Hoyle, the Big Bang, because he said, oh, those silly people, they're suggesting that the universe was created in some kind of Big Bang. And the people believing in that idea were so stupid that they proudly adopted Fred Hoyle's term of abuse for them as a description of their theory.
Well, there you have it.
It's funny. I had an astronomy professor in college who he was very cynical, and he kind of had a Rodney Dangerfield vibe about him. And he did this whole shtick where he was like, yeah, if astronomers don't know what to say about it, they just say a collision did it. And he was like, yeah, it's just a collision. And you made it as a joke, but he was like half serious about it. But then again, this is like 10 years ago, so but keep that in mind.
Well,
nice to hear Rodney Dangerfield being mentioned, because I knew him long ago. I knew all those New York comedians back in the 60s, like Joan Rivers, and Rodney was a particularly funny one.
Well, given our limited time, we should probably get into the paranormal. You use amazing terms in your book, such as inorganic living matter. So before we get into the paranormal, can you mention how plasma is, as you say, self-organizing and that sort of thing that might lead it to be interpreted as a form of life, and how it might be transmogrified into what we're going to talk about?
Excellent question. Well, plasma can exist as a gas, as a liquid, as a solid, and as crystals. So it has many forms. When it was first discovered by Sir William Crookes in 1879, the man who invented the vacuum tube, he called it radiant matter, and he said that it was the fourth stage of matter. The others being gas, liquid, and solid. As with water, you can get it as a liquid, you can freeze it and it becomes ice, and you can evaporate it and it becomes steam. And that's the perfect model of what had been called the three stages of matter. And then Crookes said, well, there's obviously a fourth stage, and he had discovered it. We now call it plasma, which, by the way, has nothing to do with blood plasma, which you get in hospitals. It's a different use of the word. And so when you get plasma in these different states, the thing that it needs to have to become really interesting is dust. It must contain dust. And when it does, it can become what is called, technically speaking, a dusty complex plasma. That's the three words used to describe this particular type of plasma. And it's been proved in laboratory experiments by some of the plasma physicists who have been working on the fringes of the science to be capable of self-organization using process which is often called emergence. That means it develops emergent characteristics apparently from nothing and spontaneously itself. That's called self-organization. And they've proved this in the lab with small plasmas, obviously not space ones. And what then happens is that it can evolve to such a state of complexity that it can spontaneously begin to develop a rudimentary form of intelligence which becomes more and more and more complex, and in fact turns out to be similar to what we now call AI. And presumably it goes further than that. So considering that the universe has so much dusty complex plasma in it, and that our sun consists of dusty complex plasma, for instance, and all the stars do, and all those nebula clouds which you see in the space photos of distant space, which have weird shapes and so on, they are probably all intelligent. And that's something to give us pause for thought, because if we think we've got brains, what about them?
Yes. I've rubbed elbows with a few shaman here and there in different countries, and the indigenous peoples almost always believe that everything has a quote-unquote spirit, whether organic or inorganic, and one wonders how much, and you get into this a little in the book, our remote ancestors anticipated this or knew about it.
Well, I mean, even in like Second Temple Judaism, right? There's this whole idea of effectively, it's like even in a lot of ancient cultures, there was this idea that there was a sort of like a spirit or a god that kind of was behind everything, but I think it's a bit more complex than that, because English is trash at this. But essentially, the idea is that the layers of reality, right? Not it's not just, okay, well, we have the physical world, we have the mundane, the spiritual, we have the political, the economic, we have, all of this stuff. They're all separate things. I find, especially in the modern world, we tend to compartmentalize everything. And it's like, okay, well, we have this over here neatly organized, we have this over here neatly organized. But there was this idea that I think Philo of Alexandria came up, sort of was explaining to the Romans in his writings, because he was essentially writing, well, this is what all this means to the Romans. That there was this idea that there was a spirit behind, not just everything. I think spirit's not even the right word. There was some sort of spiritual entity that was behind and worked alongside with, like, most things, right? So there was a horn that was blown. I forget if it was around Passover.
Yes.
Yeah, where they would blow the horn and
ram's horn,
the ram's horn. But it wasn't so much the horn, but there was the spirit of the horn that went out with the sound. And it was like this whole thing. Or like, even if you look at like this idea in like Psalms that like people go today and they're like, what the heck does that mean? It's like, because nobody wants to talk about it, ancient astrology. Nobody cares about that. That there's this idea that there's this line that goes throughout, all of the earth, and that there was this cosmic order and understanding that all these sort of beings participated in. Now, we can get really granular with it, pardon the pun, and get really into the nitty-gritty of it and say, well, it's all just physics and stuff. But symbols are symbols for a reason. Even if it has no sort of cohesive intelligence as we would understand it. The idea that this was a part of the culture of many different cultures, pretty much every culture throughout the world in pre-modern times, I think that's something to be not scoffed at.
Well, all of this can be looked upon as true now on the basis of understanding the nature of the physics of dusty complex plasmas. The plasma world basically underlies the whole of what we naively imagine reality to be as perceived by our physical senses. Plasma is everywhere. It's within us. It's around us. There's plasma in every cell in our bodies. This was proved by my great friend Peter Mitchell, who got the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1978 for discovering this, that there are these proton currents going across the membranes of every cell in every body, and so that's a plasma flow, and I maintain that we are all bioplasma beings, because bioplasma is the word used for plasma that's alive or within organic entities, and that we temporarily incarnate in the physical bodies. And when they wear out, we are forced to leave them, and we revert to our normal condition, which is to be completely plasma entities without being made of atoms at all. And that we spend most of our time, which I believe is eternal time, because I don't believe anybody dies, in the plasma state. We come here for brief sessions of learning and testing and attempting to get things done with great difficulty, because it's so difficult to get anything done, because everybody's always trying to stop you.
That's true.
Life is full of obstacles, and there are all kind of perverse people who don't want anything good to be done because they're perverse. And so it's very, very difficult, and we have to keep our spirits up, and we have to keep our optimism going, and we have to prove that we're good people and that we're tough and resilient, and that we can cope with all of this, because it's a test. We're all being tested the whole time, every day, and our goodness is the desired result. It doesn't matter whether you can be good to the whole world or good to one person. It's the quality, not the quantity, that counts. If you're a good mother and you really, really love and benefit your child, then you are just as important as a world leader. It's the quality of your goodness that's important, and it's nothing to do with the quantity.
Okay, well, in your book you say you were going to avoid theology, so I'll skip past the applied theological thoughts there and get right into a case from 1998 that I dealt with. Ben was only 6. So
needless to say, I was involved.
Well, not quite. So the question is, leading in from your statements about plasma beings. Now, I know you've read some of our work. I don't know if you've run into this one. It was a case in Rhode Island here, and I saw with the naked eye what I interpreted as a parasite. It was white. It was like lightning. It looked like plasma. It even had arms. And later on, I got a photograph of it, which I said I would send you, but I think I forgot. Sorry about that. I will. So this did not strike me as any sort of, former person or whatever. It struck me as an alien sort of life form that was preying upon the energy of this family. And we approached it as such, and we pretty much licked it. So what say you about, would that fit into the sort of cosmology, the ontology you have expressed?
Well, there are bound to be plasma parasites of the kind you describe, and people who have a weak self could be invaded and become hosts. One really wonders if the psychopaths who seem to rule the world, like Putin, somebody like Putin, for instance, whether he has been basically taken over because he was rotten to begin with. But he's and look at Hitler. He's the perfect example of somebody who was unbelievably boring and dull, except when he started to speak, and then he was possessed by some demonic power, and he was a nobody who became a somebody through a means that's by no means clear. So I think that you've probably hit upon something. It seems that there are parasites at every level of existence. There are fleas, there are mosquitoes, and there are probably plasma parasites.
Yes, we run into them all the time. It's a little early for our break, but I did want to ask you before our break. I can't help but get into some of the theology. You said we are being tested. Who or what is testing us? Or is it self-testing?
Well, you're certainly really getting down to the nitty-gritty there. I think it's both. I think that our higher selves are testing whether we're measuring up to our true selves in the difficult conditions that we find here, because we often let ourselves down, not just others. But also I believe that there are higher entities, and that they are interested in sorting out the wheat from the chaff. We do that ourselves. When we fail in terms of our character by becoming wicked, then we are self-condemned. I don't believe that there's a panel of judges sitting waiting to pass judgments on people. I think that we pass judgment on ourselves, and that we are self-condemned if we turn wicked. But if we don't turn wicked, then we're considered a great success story. And I think that there is another life in the plasma world, and that it's stratified, and that very good people go to a higher level than very bad people. I could elaborate on that, but you probably don't want to get theological.
We get there when we get there.
Yeah, we'll see. All right, well, why don't we take our mid-show break? You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with our fascinating guest, Dr. Robert Temple, so don't touch that dial.
It's time for the annual Breakfast with the Saints at the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center. Enjoy a breakfast buffet under the center's magnificently frescoed ceiling. The breakfast will be held on Sunday, April 30th from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. Tickets are $20 in advance or $25 at the door. Tickets are available at Belo's Flowers, Creative Impressions, The Honey Shop, Timeless Antiques, Vos True Value Hardware, or visit the St. Anne Arts and Cultural Center website.
Casey Kasem has unlocked the American Top 40 vaults and is replaying original shows from the 80s. This week, Casey takes you back to April 5th, 1986. That's when Robert Palmer was addicted to love. The Thompson Twins were king for a day. Stevie Wonder was overjoyed. And Janet Jackson asked, "What have you done for me lately?" You'll hear those songs, all the top 40 hits, and the long-distance dedications from April 5th, 1986, right here on American Top 40, the 80s.
ON Radio. And welcome back to WOON AM and FM Radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, and we are talking with, it's Behind the Paranormal. We're speaking with Dr. Robert Temple, all the way from the UK. And why don't we go to, you're starting to smell the brain power burning around here. So let's go to a couple of questions from Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia.
Yes, and Peter writes to us, Dear Dr. Temple, previously, you did a lot of investigations into the mysteries surrounding the Great Sphinx of Egypt. Can you update us on that?
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear from somebody in Colombia who is aware of the work that I did on the Sphinx. my wife Olivia and I wrote an entire book called The Sphinx Mystery, which contains at the back a huge appendix consisting of everything ever published about the Sphinx from ancient Roman times up till the year 1837, when it became too numerous and we had to stop. And it's all there in one book. And I translated the German, Olivia translated the French. So you've got the complete Bible of the Sphinx for 2,000 years. At the back of our book, it saves you trips to many libraries. So that's one thing. Now, I did manage to get inside the Sphinx, which was a very interesting experience, because there's a small hole in its bottom. In fact, Olivia likes to joke about the fact that the photo that she took of me with my head sticking out was Robert with his head sticking out of the Sphinx's ass, which is what it really was. I hope I haven't used a word that's too rude for some sensitivities. It's meant to be a joke. Anyway.
You wanted it not to be too rude for the FCC.
Yes, the FCC, or the FC don't see.
Truly.
So, the Federal Communications Non-Seeing Corporation. Okay, so I was inside the Sphinx, and there's a kind of pit carved out of the rock inside there, which is fairly well known to the few people who've managed to get in, because it's a very narrow hole, and if you're fat, you simply can't get in. It's impossible. And to my surprise, when I finally got in there, I saw that there was a tunnel also. I wasn't expecting a tunnel. I hadn't heard anything about it. There was a tunnel going upwards and round the right haunch of the Sphinx, which was obviously an ancient tunnel. It looked a bit dangerous, and it was propped up with very unsteady pieces of wood, which seemed to be pine, and they were a bit loose. I touched one, and it fell over, so it wasn't really holding anything up at all.
Here.
I decided not to crawl all along this tunnel because I was worried that it really might seriously collapse on me. I didn't think that was a good way to go. And so what I did is I photographed this, and I published that in the book as well. But what I was able to work out eventually was that the tunnel had gone all the way through to the head of the Sphinx in ancient times, where a priest could crawl along there and speak an oracle through the Sphinx's face, and people would think that was a god speaking. There's a bit of trickery going on there. And the reason why it doesn't go through to the front anymore is that in 1926, a French person who was hired by the then king of Egypt to tidy up the Sphinx for tourism poured concrete down there, and he broke the tunnel and in the middle, and he filled up the chamber that was beneath the Sphinx, which I forgot to mention. There really is a chamber beneath the Sphinx, but it's not original. It was what they call intruded. That is, and apparently in the 26th dynasty, the Sa'ite period, they made a shaft down through the Sphinx's waist, and they created a burial chamber down there, and somebody was buried down there because the remains of a coffin were found. And so I have published and, when necessary, translated all the descriptions, the eyewitness descriptions of people who saw and entered this chamber over a period of 350 years. Now, why did the Egyptological scholars not know this? This I cannot understand, except for the fact that very few of them seem to know how to use a library. They're good at digging, they're good at texts, but they can't collate references and look up old books, it seems. So I've published all of these accounts of 350 years worth of eyewitnesses who saw the chamber under the Sphinx. But it had hieroglyphics on the walls, so it was not original, because the Sphinx was from a period before they put hieroglyphics on walls of chambers. And so this was all filled with concrete in 1926. A terrible act of desecration by this French idiot, whose name I forget. And So all of this is in the book, and then I was able to identify the face on the Sphinx, because anyone who goes to the Sphinx knows that it's a gigantic statue the size of an ocean liner, practically, with a little tiny P on the top where there should be a head. They're much too small. And we all know that the Egyptians were obsessive about proper proportions in their art and architecture and so on. They would never have made a statue with a P for a head. And so it's obvious that the original head was missing, and the new head with the face was carved out of the neck of what had been a much larger head, which I suggest was a dog's head, and that the Sphinx was by no means the body of a lion. It was the statue of the crouching dog Anubis, who was the traditional guardian of the sacred necropolis. And he was also a god, the god Anubis, connected with the dog star, actually, Sirius. And so when the Old Kingdom came to an end, then there was a period of the collapse of about 150 years when Egypt had no government and no pharaoh, and the people were running around in mobs, rioting, smashing things. And it's very well known to all Egyptologists that mobs rampaged at Giza, and that they smashed all the statues and that sort of thing. And at that time, it would have been very easy for them to show their anger and fury by knocking the ears and nose off of the Anubis head. So, and therefore basically leaving a stump. And now when Egypt got back on its feet again in what's known as the Middle Kingdom, and we had pharaohs again, it was a bit embarrassing that the sacred location of Giza had this mutilated giant statue sitting there. Not what is something that's good for the brand. And so it was decided quite sensibly to carve a face onto the neck and give the Sphinx a face. Well, so then the question is whose face? And there was a particular pharaoh, and I've identified him, who apparently said to the people who were going to do the carving, I have an idea that I might rather like my own face to be on the Sphinx. So that duly happened, and I've identified him and proved that it's his face, and his name was Amenemhet II. He was a Middle Kingdom pharaoh. Now, I was preceded in this by a German Egyptologist called Burckhardt, Ludwig Burckhardt, who had studied the headdress of this face, and he had done a chronological history of headdresses. And he had proved that the only period in Egyptian history that could have carved that particular headdress was in the Middle Kingdom. So he was on the right track, but I was able to pin it down to which pharaoh by photographing the face of the same pharaoh that's perfectly preserved in the Louvre in Paris, and publishing it side by side with the photograph of the face of the Sphinx, and you can see it's the same man. So there you go. Everything you ever wanted to know about the Sphinx and never dared to ask, as Woody Allen would say, is in my book, The Sphinx Mystery.
But how is the Sphinx related to plasma there? But let's get back to plasma. There's a fascinating quote associated with your book. I'd like to read it. Clouds of plasma have evolved double helixes, banks of cells and crystals, filaments and junctions, which could control the flow of electric currents, thus generating an intelligence similar to machine intelligence. We may, in fact, have been looking for signs of extraterrestrial life in the wrong place. Could you comment on that incredible statement?
Yes. Well, our SETI programs are looking for little green men on other planets far, far away, hoping to find somebody, and they say they haven't had any luck. Who knows? But in a way, that doesn't really matter, because the universe is evidently full of highly intelligent entities which are inorganic. That is, they are not composed of atoms, and so they are plasma entities. And our sun would be an example. I believe the sun is conscious and highly intelligent, and that it's basically in charge of the solar system. We are actually within the sun because the solar system is filled with the solar wind, which is coming out of the sun, and the whole solar system is basically the sun. It's just that it's quite diffuse in its outer reaches, and the little hard bodies like the planet Earth can hurtle around safely in it. But we are within the sun. We are creatures of the sun. You could say that the sun is therefore the big guy on the block, and we're the followers. We're the little guys on the block following this leader, and so he would be the big chief for us in this region of the galaxy. But the galaxy is full of much bigger stars, and of course the galaxy itself is probably super intelligent. And the intelligence gets up and up and up and higher and higher and higher, and the higher entities become bigger and bigger and more impressive. And there's this hierarchy which seems to go on endlessly. And the higher up you go, the more intelligent the entities are, and they're all made of plasma.
Now, what do your colleagues think of this?
Well, I'm not a full-time academic. I never have been. I've been appointed twice a visiting professor, which is quite different because I don't depend upon the academic world for my livelihood or career.
Good.
And I wouldn't be able to live on a campus for very long without going bonkers because, frankly, the academic world is more vicious and more dangerous than the world of politics. I mean, I'd sooner be in the snake pit of Washington D.C. than be on a university campus where everybody's stabbing each other in the back all day long, every day. It's a real viper's nest, and I don't want to be involved with any of that. So I'm what they call an independent scholar. I proudly claim the description scholar because I spend all my time researching. And that's what I do, and I like it, and I know that I'm very good at it because when I've occasionally sat side by side with another researcher, I go through things 10 times faster, and that shows that I'm quite good at my job. I like that. So when you talk about my colleagues, I don't have any on a campus, and I don't have any regular colleagues. And I suppose most of the scientists I know would not consider me a colleague because I'm not officially employed in the academic world. I've met many famous scientists. In fact, I don't know why I did it, but I kept a list of the Nobel Prize winners I had met, and I've added to it from time to time, and it comes to 79.
Wow,
that's a lot, and
yes.
I could hardly believe it myself. And even when I was 18, I met my first famous scientist and spent 4 hours alone with him. That was Paul Dirac, D-I-R-A-C, who is a kind of legend in the field of quantum mechanics. He was a wonderful man, very, very shy, but I won't go into all those anecdotes. But I have known and met many famous scientists, and I've kind of been tutored by them all in my private conversations. It's a wonderful way to learn science when you talk to the top people, and if you can get them going. Like, I used to have these conversations with John Wheeler, who's, I think his last academic post was the University of Texas. And when he would come over to England to lecture at Oxford, and everybody would leave except for me, and then he and I would sit around for a couple of hours talking about physics, and he'd crack his jokes because he was, some of the best scientists have got a great sense of humor, and you never stop laughing, and in between laughing, you talk physics. That's what he was like. I really liked John Wheeler. And there were lots of famous scientists that I could describe. But the thing is that I don't think that it makes a lot of sense to talk about my colleagues because I'm too independent. So if you rephrase that and say, what do plasma physicists, for instance, think about what you're saying? I would have to say that I've been pretty straight about quoting them and citing them accurately. I have not misrepresented anybody, and I'm very meticulous with my footnotes. So there's nothing in my book that emanates from a scientist that isn't footnoted and completely and totally accurate. So anything else that's in the book is my interpretation and elaboration of that. Well, do they approve of that or not? It's hard to say, because a lot of them are too frightened, being members of this organization of official academia, that if they were to open their mouths, they might not get the next grant, they might not get promoted, their careers could be at risk. There's a tremendous fear of stepping out of line. If you become even 1% renegade, your career is finished. The most outspoken of the famous scientists that I've either known or haven't known but have quoted have been retired so that they were free to speak. And that's where they really say what they really think. So the ones who are still working, they might think all kinds of things. They might really like what I'm saying, or they might be frightened of it, or they might disapprove of it. They might say Temple's full of nonsense. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Who knows what their opinions are, but they are, in any case, they're afraid to say it. And I must say, not a single one of them has yet criticized me. I haven't had any criticism at all from any scientist, even though a lot of them have my book, because I sent my book prior to publication to many, many famous scientists so that they could see it for themselves before it came out. And if they had anything to complain about, they could. Not a single one has done so. I haven't had any criticism. So that must mean something. On the other hand, there's only been a few of them who have actually praised me and the book. So, and they are the ones who are particularly courageous, and particularly a couple of them who are, as I say, retired, and they can't suffer any consequences anymore because they're out of the game. So they can say what they really think. But having alerted everybody in advance that I was publishing all this about plasma, there's been this silence from most of them. But I interpret that positively, because if they could see anything that was wrong with the book, they could thunder away at me and criticize me and say I was some kind of nut, but nothing like that has happened. Just, I think, kind of I don't know, it's just when there's silence and it's not a critical silence, then I guess you can only interpret that positively, because you're not being attacked.
Yes, true.
They can't claim to be ignorant, because I sent the book to them and wrote to them and explained it to them so that they knew exactly what was going to happen in advance.
Well, but Ben has a question, but very quickly, can you tell us about your website, where people can find more about the book, A New Science of Heaven?
Well, I also made an audio recording of it. So there's an audio version which you can get and download from Audible. Mm-hmm. And I recorded it myself. I recommend it, although it is 12 hours long. Now, I have to say that the book is also written for non-scientists. Not a single equation is in it. And it's written for the general reader. Very much so. And it's the only book that tells you all this, because there's no competition, because I'm the first person to do this. And none of the science writers have told the public anything about the plasma world. So where can you find out more? I would say I haven't, I meant to create a website specifically for the book, and there is a holding page for one, but I haven't done it. And I have a certain amount about it on my personal website, which is robert-temple.com. And also, a lot of my technical papers are on researchgate.net. You type in my name and my papers come up. But otherwise, you'd have to go to the footnotes in my book and start reading all the references, of which there are hundreds, really hundreds, because I'm one of those fanatical perfectionists who have to find out everything on the subject and list everything. And I even have to get the middle names of all the scientists and their dates. I just like complete information. So many people don't know, for instance, the middle names of famous scientists, but I always have to find out the middle names. It's just a silly thing.
Well, that's okay. Well, let's get Ben's question in.
Sure. So this, I kind of want to. Well, I'll throw out the question, and then we'll see where it goes. What is a body?
Well, if you're talking about physical bodies, I think we know the answer to that. But I believe that there are many bodies which don't have any atoms in them at all and which are entirely made of plasma. And they come in all shapes and sizes. And so the most basic answer to the question is to say a body is an entity enclosed by a sheath or membrane or skin or whatever. The largest organ of the human body is the skin. It weighs more, and if taken off. And with plasma, blobs of plasma are called plasmoids, and they can be of any size and shape, and they are surrounded by sheaths which are double-layered, similar to the double-layered membranes around cells. So I think an entity which is bounded could be called a body.
All right.
I'm reminded of Origen in his works on the idea of ascension, and there was this idea that was attributed to him that he believed that when people were sort of deified, they kind of became like round almost. There was that whole idea, but I'm more interested in this idea because it sounds like you're taking it. Correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds very Platonistic, and I'm going to explain. So you had Plato with his idea of the sort of the mind, the body spirit dichotomy. That really the body is just a house for the spirit, etc. But in this case, we can just substitute the word spirit with plasma. So the whole point of a body is just to experience stuff, correct? That's the whole point of experiencing things in this particular physical plane. Yes?
Yes. To not just to experience, but to test yourself and be tested.
So who determines where are the morals and rules determined for this test?
Well, I don't think they're determined in the sense of a sacred text or something carved in stone on a tablet on Mount Horeb. I think that they are basic to the universe. To have compassion and empathy for other entities is fundamental, and the more you do, as long as you remain practical at the same time and don't just become foolish, then your goodness level goes up. But I would criticize the current craze for virtue signaling, which is false goodness, because a really good person does not need to signal. If you have to signal your virtue, you're not virtuous.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. But I find that there's this problem that Thomas Nagel points out in his book, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, which is the idea of understanding our consciousness. So the whole premise, we have a very short period of time, but essentially he asks the question, what is it like to be a bat? And the answer is, well, we don't know. We just know what it's like to be a human in a bat body. We'll never know what it feels like to flap our wings. We'll never know what it's like to use echolocation. We will only know, wow, I'm doing bat-like things. And we do not know what it is like to be a bat. So if that is the case, we really only know things through our sort of very narrow experience of reality, through which all of this is interpreted. So the whole problem of the subjectivity, objectivity, whole thing. I don't disagree with the science. I know it's there, but the problem that I'm having is the phenomenological portion of it, the experience of it. The idea that that there's this sort of thing outside. It's if something's entirely alien, right? Something's entirely outside ourselves. Let's say there's a universal truth for being compassionate. I think it's hard personally for me to understand that there's this whole thing outside of human reality, because all we know is what we've experienced and what comes down to us through experience. How do we know that this is a universal concept, is my question.
Well, when you talk about what's it like to be a bat, of course, that is fascinating. I don't know that book, but that sounds really interesting. It's actually a very, very interesting way to talk and think. When we look deep into our dog's eyes or a cat's eyes, or when we come across a wild animal in the jungle, I have a friend who once came within inches of a leopard in a tree, and they stared at each other. And you're basically communing or attempting to commune with an entity of an alien form. And I would believe that in the plasma state we can probably know what it's like to be a bat. But as long as we're confined within a particular type of physical body, namely a human one, as is our case, then we're limited to its experiences. But once we're freed from that, I think that we could experience what it's like to be a bat if we really wanted to. And there may be batternauts.
Indeed. I do like that term.
There we have it. Okay, we're almost just about out of time. Robert, it has been wonderful. We will continue our conversations off the air.
Truly fascinating.
Absolutely. And just very quickly, no, we're out of time. I was curious for our next show if you had any questions for us regarding our work, since we have come along the same lines here and similar conclusions. So. But thank you so much. We'll leave that for another day. And stick with us if you wish. We could talk off the air. Ben, let's take away our announcements.
Indeed. So you can look for us at the Exeter UFO Festival in September, for my dad, at the Arizona Dowsers Conference in October.
Visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find nearly 1,200 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008. From CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WON AM and FM. Also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms and apps, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
And you can also check out so many interesting things that we're doing, up to and including all the things that we have going on coming up. But we also have Easter coming up for the next 2 weeks, regular Easter, which is on the 9th, and we'll do a rebroadcast of the popular show with Peter Robbins, UFO and Alien Imaging in Advertising. And then on April 16th, it is Orthodox Easter, Pascha, if you will. We'll be doing a rebroadcast of our show with Jillian Harris on reincarnation. Have we met? And we'll be back live on April 23rd, which is actually my wedding anniversary, with Open Lines.
Oh boy!
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
No.
Okay.
No.
Bring my daughter-in-law.
Yeah. Special
Open
guest
lines.
Marion.
Okay, very good. Well, we'll leave you today with a thought from. Well, we don't really know who said it. Moon dust in your lungs, stars in your eyes. You are a child of the cosmos, a ruler of the skies.
Wow.
What?
I wish I was flying around. Then I could prove it. And then we could see
you could
what
if
it
you
is
were
like.
A bat.
Exactly. We could truly see what it was like to be a bat.
Very good. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno. And thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey. And we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno. Local and live at 99.5 FM.